So, the liturgical year part 2 about the Ascension and Pentecost, and then feast days as a whole. So, the Ascension. Now, this is a bit of a toughie, these two, that's why it's a short video all by itself. If you get asked to describe how Catholics celebrate the Ascension, number one, guess what? They go to Mass. Why? Because it's a holy day of obligation. They're supposed to go on this day. The readings at Mass, they focus on how it's now down to us to carry on Jesus' mission, okay? So they might have the readings that talk about us having to baptize all nations and go and evangelize, that type of stuff. There's Ascension walks that are held. Why? To evangelize Jesus's, what's called the message of Jesus' Ascension to all people, okay? Catholics also spend part of the day in prayer or contemplation, okay? Why? To give us a focus on how exactly we can carry on Jesus' mission ourselves. And now we start, it starts a time of preparation for Pentecost. So essentially we've been told, look, you need to go and do this. And it's now, we're sort of like building up towards our real-time Pentecost when that sort of responsibility is handed over to us. Okay, when the Holy Spirit is sort of comes to join us, comes to join the disciples in the past as well, right? That it's a sort of time of preparation for that. So it might be sort of like prayer, we might do some readings about Pentecost, we might reflect upon what Jesus has done and think about how we can do that in our lives. Now, why is it important to Catholics? Jesus' Ascension is important because it reminds us he's our Messiah. Why? Well, because it fulfilled Old Testament prophecy that the Messiah would be raised, was called into heaven, and seated at the right hand of the Father, which is what is in the account. Also, it signals the birth of the church, essentially the beginning of human beings leading it forward. Why? Because Jesus handed on his power and authority to us, okay? Said, off you go, boys. All right, crack on. It's now down to you. The next one is that it's important because it was when Jesus promised the Holy Spirit to us, okay? He said that he would send, all right, the Holy Spirit to the disciples and to us to help guide us in our lives, all right? So it's the time when he promised the Holy Spirit to us. It reminds us of that. And also, it reminds us of final judgment. Why? Because when Jesus is raised, all right, there are two white-robed men essentially going, guys, come on, what are you doing? You've been given an instruction, crack on with it. But remember that one day Jesus will return, and when he does, okay, that is when you will be judged on whether you go to heaven or hell forever and ever. So it helps to refocus or just focus, as well, Catholics who are there present. Alternative, then, if Jesus' Ascension isn't important, or the Ascension isn't an important day of the year, we would say the reasons why it isn't important is because it just seems like a bit of an afterthought. It's like the goodbye part, all right? It's like the credits, if you want, in a film, that Jesus throughout his life said about how we're going to have to carry it on. This is just like that final goodbye. So you could say it seems like a bit of an afterthought, and that's why not many people know about it as much, or not many people attend Mass at this time, that sort of thing. You could say that some people struggle to believe in it. The idea that Jesus, being alive, raised into heaven, and then you would see him sitting at the right hand of the Father, it's pretty tough to believe, okay? So you can use that sort of idea. And you can also say about there are far more important times of the year for Catholics. Easter, Christmas, Good Friday, okay? Pentecost. Now, so you could be asked to describe how Catholics celebrate Pentecost. So this is the day that Jesus had promised the Holy Spirit would come to the disciples, and he came, all right? So when we remember that. So first things first, we go to Mass. Now, why? It's a holy day of obligation. The readings on, it was called in Mass, they focus on, sounds like an echo, doesn't it, from Jesus' Ascension, because there's lots of similarities. So, that it's now down to us to carry on Jesus' mission, and the Holy Spirit is with us, okay? So the readings focus upon this. The readings go on about the Pentecost account. The priest wears red, okay? And it's a symbol of the Holy Spirit, okay? The symbol of fire. The next one, the sacrament of baptism, is celebrated in many churches. Why? Because it allows the church to grow, all right, and it fulfills sort of Jesus' teachings to baptize all nations that he said just before you ascend into heaven. The sacrament of confirmation is celebrated by the bishop at this cathedral. Why? Same thing, to help the church to grow. And some people take part in what's called a wit walk, okay? So the wit walk, all right, you can talk about how it's a form of evangelization. Why is Pentecost important, you would also be asked. So the reason it's important is considered the birth of the church. Why? It's now over to human beings to go and lead it, all right? It's also the start of the Holy Spirit's time on earth, because he came down to the disciples, all right? And we remember this now, the Holy Spirit is still there with us now, okay? Those are actually two separate points. So it reminds us that this is the beginning of the Holy Spirit's time, all right? And you talk about how he came to the disciples during Pentecost. But your third point would be, it reminds us of the importance of the Holy Spirit and how the Holy Spirit is still there for us now, okay, to support us. And you can link that to, like, that's why the priesthood is red or something like that. Finally, it reminds us of the importance of evangelization and how we've got to continue to carry out Jesus's mission. Okay, it's quite sort of very similar to the describe how in lots of ways. The alternative, same thing. Feels like it feels like an afterthought. Okay, compared to other events, far more important events. And I suppose a really strong point would be that not even the people around the disciples fully believed in Pentecost. So, for example, some of them said that they had just drunk too much wine when they started speaking different languages. So you can bring that into your answer. You can say that it's hard for us to believe, and this is proved by the fact it was hard for the people who were actually present. Now, if you get asked about the liturgical year as a whole or about feast days, then you can talk about what Catholics do on these sort of days. Now, if you get asked to describe how Catholics celebrate feast days, then say things like attend Mass, talk about the readings, talk about their different practices to help Catholics understand the significance of the day, talk about the fact they're in prayer or they reflect, or you can talk about how they display their faith. Now, with all those things, just talk about the stuff we've mentioned on all the other days. So, display what's called their faith or do God's work on this day. Well, they go on Ascension walks, they go on Whit walks, they go on the Good Friday walk, okay? That's the way that they show their religion to others. Now, if you get asked to explain the importance of feast days, then number one, they remind us of key events that our faith is based upon. Then you can explain that all by yourself, straightforward. Next one is that they remind us of key people in our lives to model our lives on. So, feast days for this one, you could talk about days like, okay, so go out of Jesus' life here, you could talk about St. Peter and St. Paul Day, or All Saints Day, or the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, if you wanted to. But save that for the next one, because the third point is that it reminds us of the importance of Mary. Why? Because there's 2 days that are dedicated to her, and we can follow her example. So that's why we celebrate the Immaculate Conception, and also her Annunciation. Finally, they remind us of some of our core beliefs. Why? Because some of the days are celebrate these feast days that remember these core beliefs. For example, Corpus Christi, that reminds us of the importance of transubstantiation, okay, or the importance of sort of Eucharist and Holy Communion. Alternative, if this comes up as an evaluation question about feast days, you can say that it isn't feast days that teach us about our faith, but you've got the Bible, you've got church teaching, that sort of stuff. You can say the other sort of second point could be that, yes, feast days are important, but also we should do all these things all of the time, all right? And it isn't just on the feast days that we need to do God's work, but all the time in our lives. That is the liturgical year done.